The empath is about to enter the biggest comeback of their life. Jung, insight. There's a particular kind of person almost everyone has met at least once. The one who notices when you're upset before you've said a word, who remembers details about your life you don't remember telling them, who can read a room the second they walk into it. For a long time, that person has usually ended up exhausted, taken advantage of, and quietly resentful, not because something is wrong with them, but because the very gift that makes them so perceptive has spent years being used against them instead of for them. If you've ever been that person, or loved one, this is the part of the story that usually gets left out. That gift was never the problem. How it was being used was. What follows is an exploration of a shift that's been building quietly for years inside highly sensitive, highly perceptive people. The ones often labeled too much, too emotional, too sensitive. Carl Jung had a name for the psychological mechanism behind this shift. And once you understand it, you start to see why so many gentle, accommodating people are suddenly setting boundaries that would have seemed impossible to them 5 years ago. The age that rewarded the wrong skill set. For a long stretch of recent history, the social and professional world has quietly rewarded a very specific set of traits. Dominance, aggression, a willingness to talk over people, an ability to treat relationships like transactions. Manipulation got rebranded as strategy. Emotional exploitation got rebranded as just business. Meanwhile, the people who felt everything, who absorbed other people's moods, picked up on the smallest shift in tone, sensed tension nobody else in the room had noticed, were treated like the soft ones, the breakable ones, the ones who needed to toughen up. What almost nobody noticed while this was happening is that the sensitive ones weren't just enduring this era, they were studying it. Every time someone lied to them, they quietly filed away the pattern. Every time someone manipulated them, they picked up the mechanics of how it worked. Every time someone used them and walked away unbothered, they learned a little more about exactly how that kind of person operates. While the self-interested types were busy celebrating short-term wins, the people absorbing all of that emotional fallout were unknowingly building an enormous internal database on how manipulation actually functions, observed from the inside. This matters now because Jung described a principle that applies almost perfectly to what's happening to a lot of these people at once. The idea that anything pushed far enough toward one extreme eventually flips into its opposite. Darkness gives way to light. Weakness, pushed past its limit, gives way to strength. Long-held silence, pushed past its limit, gives way to a kind of clarity that can no longer be talked out of itself. Jung saw this pattern show up again and again, both in individual people and across entire cultures, a long period of imbalance that eventually corrects itself, often more sharply than anyone expected. A culture built heavily on self-interest tends to hit a ceiling. It starts consuming its own foundation, and the very qualities that got exploited along the way, the deep attentiveness, the emotional read on a room, the instinct for what's not being said, are exactly the qualities about to become valuable again, in ways the people who dismissed them never anticipated. Reading the room was never the weakness. Consider what it actually means to be the kind of person who can read a room instantly, who can sense when someone is lying before the sentence is even finished, who picks up on a shift in someone's energy that everyone else in the conversation completely missed, who understands what's motivating a person at a level most people never bother to look for. That's not fragility. That is a sophisticated form of psychological perception. It only ever looked like a weakness because it was being used defensively to keep the peace, to smooth things over, to quietly absorb everyone else's discomfort so they wouldn't have to feel it themselves. Over time, a lot of perceptive people unknowingly turned their own gift into an unpaid service role. They became the emotional cleanup crew for other people's messes. They became human shock absorbers, softening the blow of consequences that other people should have faced themselves. They became translators, constantly explaining difficult people to the people they'd hurt, and explaining hurt people to the difficult people who'd hurt them. The entire time, without realizing it, they were drastically undervaluing one of the rarest skill sets a person can have. But something has been shifting. Jung's framework for this shift has an almost unsettling level of precision. He studied what happens psychologically when someone gets pushed past a real breaking point. Not the kind of breaking point where a person simply collapses, but the kind where something in them reverses direction entirely. He had a term for it: enantiodromia. The basic idea is straightforward. Once pressure on a psychological pattern reaches an extreme, the pattern doesn't just snap, it flips. The endlessly gentle person becomes fierce. The person who gave without limits becomes selective about who earns access to them. The person who stayed wide open becomes someone with real walls. The person who spent years being agreeable, no matter the cost, starts becoming real instead, sometimes for the first time in their adult life. The person who used to absorb everyone else's emotions starts setting boundaries that hold like actual structure. The one who stayed quiet to avoid conflict starts saying things that quietly dismantle illusions other people had built their whole identity around. The chronic people pleaser, who spent years contorting themselves for approval, suddenly stands in their own position so solidly that they become almost impossible to move. None of this is a breakdown. It's closer to an emergence, the arrival, finally, of a complete person, the other half of the self. Here's the part that tends to surprise people the most. The qualities that highly sensitive people have spent their whole lives suppressing: the anger, the willingness to enforce a boundary, the refusal to keep tolerating manipulation, the ability to cut someone off without circling back to feel guilty about it, the capacity to say no without writing a paragraph justifying it, the willingness to put their own needs ahead of someone else's comfort, the strength to let someone face the consequences of their own choices instead of stepping in to rescue them. None of that is the enemy. That's the missing half of the same person. Most sensitive people were quietly taught to be afraid of these traits. They were told anger makes them a bad person, that boundaries make them selfish, that protecting their own energy puts them in the same category as the very people who exploited them, that prioritizing themselves is no different from the self-absorption they've spent years resenting in others. So they buried those traits. They became, in a sense, half a person. All softness, no edge. All giving, no taking. All sensitivity, no strength. All absorption, no reflection back. But a coin can't function with only one side. A battery can't run on only a positive charge. And a person can't be whole running entirely on the gentle half of their own nature. Jung spent much of his working life trying to get people to understand exactly this, the idea of integration, of wholeness, of bringing the disowned half of a personality back into the picture rather than continuing to exile it. He considered that union of opposites some of the most important psychological work a person can do. The kind of comeback being described here isn't about a sensitive person turning into the very type of person who hurt them. It's about becoming complete, adding back the half that got cut off out of fear. The part of a person that knows when to push back instead of disappear, when to speak instead of swallow it, when to cut ties instead of keep trying to heal someone who hasn't asked to be healed, when to put themselves first instead of automatically sacrificing for someone who wouldn't return the favor. That part isn't a flaw. It's protection. It's strength that was simply never given permission to exist out loud. Why this is so unsettling to the people who used to benefit. Here's what makes a fully integrated empath such a different proposition for anyone used to manipulating them. They keep every bit of the perceptiveness they always had. They still see through dishonesty almost immediately. They still read people with uncanny accuracy. They still understand emotional undercurrents better than almost anyone in the room. They still notice what's going unsaid. But now none of that perception gets funneled into fixing, rescuing, or smoothing things over for someone else's benefit. It gets used strategically to protect their own time and energy, to build the kind of life they actually want, and to quietly remove anyone who can't or won't meet them at the same level. Picture what this looks like in a fairly ordinary moment. Someone walks into a room fully expecting to charm everyone in it the way they always have. The newly integrated empath clocks the pattern within about 30 seconds, recognizes the love bombing for what it is, notices the way this person is sizing up the room to see who might be useful to them, watches the slight shift in personality depending on who they're talking to. But instead of trying to warn anyone else in the room or step in and manage the situation, they simply create distance. No confrontation, no long explanation, just quiet, deliberate space. The familiar manipulation tactics get tried anyway. The guilt trip, the subtle gaslighting, the sudden pivot into playing the victim. The integrated empath recognizes the script almost instantly and shuts it down, sometimes with a single sentence, sometimes with nothing more than silence and physical distance. The person who only shows up when they need an emotional favor or a crisis to offload gets met with calm disengagement rather than rescue. The family member with a long history of using guilt as leverage suddenly runs into a boundary that would have seemed completely unthinkable a year earlier. The friend who only calls when they need something stops getting answered at all. The partner who plays games gets quietly replaced by someone who doesn't need to play any. None of this is revenge. It isn't about becoming the very thing that caused the harm in the first place. It's about reaching a level of psychological development where those old tactics simply stop landing. Rules that were never actually rules. For a long time, manipulative and self-interested people have had an advantage, mostly because the people on the receiving end were playing by a set of unwritten rules that guaranteed they'd lose. Always be nice. Always give another chance. Always look for the good in everyone. Sacrifice yourself for the people around you. Turn the other cheek. Go the extra mile. Be the bigger person. None of that is actually a universal moral law. Those are control mechanisms dressed up as virtue, and a lot of sensitive people are starting to see that clearly for the first time. Being kind to someone who hasn't earned it isn't kindness, it's quietly betraying your own needs. Giving another chance to someone who's done nothing to deserve it isn't mercy, it's enabling a pattern to continue. Insisting on seeing the good in someone who is actively hurting you isn't wisdom, it's a kind of self-imposed blindness. Sacrificing yourself for people who wouldn't do the same for you isn't noble, it's simply a habit that needs to end. What's also worth noticing is that this isn't only a personal shift happening inside individuals one at a time, it's structural. The wider world is genuinely changing in ways that favor exactly the skills sensitive, perceptive people have spent their whole lives developing without much recognition. For decades, the social and economic world rewarded dominance, the loudest voice, the person willing to walk over others to get ahead, the one who showed no emotion, the leader who treated people as interchangeable resources. That approach worked reasonably well in a simpler economy, built on hierarchy and compliance. It does not work nearly as well in a connected, complicated, emotionally demanding world where trust, collaboration, and genuine connection are the actual engine of value. Even the culture around all of this is shifting. People are questioning systems that quietly rewarded self-interested behavior for years. Manipulation that used to get dismissed as just how some people are is starting to get named for what it is. Authenticity is being treated as something worth protecting rather than something to be smoothed over for the sake of politeness. There's more room now for honest conversations about emotional exhaustion, and less patience for performative positivity that asks people to paper over real exhaustion with a forced smile. The pendulum swung so far in one direction for so long that the swing back, when it finally comes, tends to come with real force, and when it settles, the people who spent years developing emotional depth rather than emotional performance are going to be standing exactly where the world actually needs them. Jung saw something like this coming in his own way. He understood that history doesn't move in a straight line so much as it moves in cycles, that whatever gets suppressed for long enough eventually finds its way back to the surface, that whatever gets undervalued for long enough eventually becomes precious again, and that consciousness tends to shift first inside individual people before it ever shows up at the level of an entire culture. Sensitive, perceptive people have been operating quietly under the surface of social life for so long that a lot of the world simply forgot what that combination of depth and strength looks like when it's fully formed. A person who feels everything and has real boundaries is one of the more unusual combinations in human psychology, mostly because so few people are ever given permission to develop both halves at once. The traits that matter most now look a lot like the traits perceptive people have been quietly practicing their entire lives. Reading people accurately, sensing what's happening beneath the surface of a conversation, building real trust instead of surface-level rapport, creating environments where people feel safe enough to do honest work, anticipating what someone needs before they've had to ask for it. None of that qualifies as a soft skill anymore. It's becoming some of the most valuable capability in business, leadership, and relationships of every kind. The world is slowly catching up to something sensitive people have understood for a long time. Emotion isn't the opposite of useful information. It is information, a form of intelligence most people simply never learn to read. Companies are starting to notice the cost of leadership built on intimidation. The executive who delivers fast results by running people into the ground tends to burn out their teams and quietly poison the culture around them. The manager who leads through fear loses the people worth keeping. What organizations increasingly want is someone who can actually read a room, understand what people need to do their best work, and build loyalty instead of compliance, which is, in essence, an emotionally perceptive person who has also learned to set firm boundaries, not a pushover. Someone strategically capable and emotionally intelligent at the same time. The same shift is happening in personal relationships. People are tired of surface-level connection, tired of game playing, tired of partners who can't communicate honestly, tired of friends who only appear when it's convenient for them, tired of family dynamics held together by guilt and obligation rather than genuine closeness. What people actually want is depth, someone who sees them clearly, who doesn't need a lengthy explanation to understand what they're feeling, who can sit with complexity instead of running from it. That has always come naturally to perceptive people. The difference now is that they're offering it with boundaries attached, with standards, with a genuine willingness to walk away from anything that doesn't meet a basic threshold of honesty. What the comeback actually looks like. This is where the shift moves from theory into ordinary daily life. The relative who used to drain hours out of someone's week with their drama now gets a single boundary, stated once, without negotiation. No more multi-hour phone calls absorbing someone else's crisis. No more hosting gatherings for people who've never shown basic respect in return. No more producing a careful explanation for choices that were never anyone else's to approve in the first place. Friends who only reach out when they need something get quietly distanced. No confrontation, no dramatic conversation, just a gradual, deliberate fade that protects the other person's peace without requiring a debate about it. Romantic partners who play games get replaced by people who actually match the emotional maturity being offered to them. No more dating someone's potential instead of who they actually are. No more trying to repair a person who never asked to be repaired. No more staying out of sheer history. No more giving repeated chances to someone who has already shown, clearly and repeatedly, exactly who they are. Workplaces that quietly exploited someone's empathy for years, treating them as the unofficial emotional support system for an entire office, while compensating them like everyone else, start getting traded for environments that actually value those skills and pay accordingly. No more working twice as hard for half the recognition. No more sacrificing personal boundaries to keep corporate harmony intact. And underneath all of it, something that used to be constant quietly disappears. The guilt, the second guessing, the endless internal debate over whether a boundary is too harsh, the constant wondering whether one more chance is owed. What replaces it is something much simpler, clear decisions, made from clear values, without needing anyone else's sign-off. That, in the end, is the real engine behind this kind of integration. A person who has become whole doesn't need outside validation to feel sure about their own choices. The comeback being described here isn't loud. It isn't built around proving anything to the people who caused the original harm. It isn't revenge, and it isn't a victory lap. It's something quieter, and, in a strange way, far more powerful: indifference. The person who used to occupy a huge amount of someone's mental energy simply stops mattering. The old manipulator's usual tricks become irrelevant, not because they were defeated in some dramatic confrontation, but because the person they used to work on has moved into a completely different register of psychological functioning. They're not playing the same game anymore. In fact, they may not even be playing a game the old manipulator recognizes as a game at all. Training. Not wasted time. None of those difficult years were wasted, even though it can feel that way in the middle of them. Every time someone got used by another person, they learned something real about how that kind of person operates. Every time someone got lied to, they sharpened an instinct for dishonesty that would put a professional interrogator to shame. Every time someone absorbed someone else's pain, they were quietly building a kind of psychological endurance most people never have reason to develop. Every period of staying silent turned into a private archive of observed human behavior patterns, tells, motivations, the small inconsistencies that give a manipulator away. None of it was wasted. It was training, even when it didn't feel like it at the time. And for a lot of people, that training is close to finished. Jung's broader view was that every psychological pattern eventually serves some purpose, that what looks purely like suffering tends to build a kind of capacity most people never get the chance to develop, that sensitivity itself functions as a form of intelligence, and that the very traits a person was taught to see as liabilities were often advanced capabilities they simply hadn't yet learned to use on their own behalf. Deep empathy isn't a flaw in the design. It's closer to an upgrade. Most people never received the ability to feel what others feel, to notice what others miss, to understand what most people are content to ignore. That's not a malfunction. That's a feature that's been running in the wrong mode for a long time, trying to be endlessly accommodating in a world that rewards directness, trying to help everyone in a system built around self-protection, trying to absorb pain in an era that seems to manufacture an endless supply of it. What's happening now, for a growing number of people, is something closer to an update, adding the missing piece, integrating the parts of themselves they were taught to fear, building real boundaries, and learning to use their own perception deliberately instead of defensively. Once that process settles into place, what's left is someone who can see clearly and still act decisively, who can read people accurately and choose wisely instead of rescuing automatically, who can feel deeply without being flattened by it, and who can love people fully while still being able to walk away cleanly when walking away is the right call. The very era that wore them down also, without meaning to, built them into something far more capable than the version of themselves that existed before any of it happened. If there's a single idea worth holding onto out of all of this, it's probably this. The goal was never to stop feeling things deeply. The world doesn't actually need fewer people who notice when something's wrong, who sense the tension under a forced smile, who can tell when someone means what they're saying. What the world has needed for a long time is for those same people to stop handing that gift over for free to anyone who happened to ask for it. You don't owe anyone an apology for the version of you that finally stopped explaining itself. You don't have to perform forgiveness. You don't feel or manufacture patience you've already spent just because someone is uncomfortable with the boundary you've drawn. The years you spent absorbing, observing, and adapting weren't a detour from who you were supposed to become. They were the long, unglamorous middle of becoming exactly that person. Nobody throws a party for this kind of growth, because it rarely looks dramatic from the outside. Most of the time, it looks like silence where there used to be over-explaining. It looks like a phone call that doesn't get returned. It looks like a room you simply stop walking into. That's not coldness. That's not you becoming someone you'd be ashamed of. That's the part of you that was always capable of protecting the rest of you, finally being allowed to do its job. And once it starts, there's very little reason to ask it to stop. Now, I'd like to share a meaningful story with everyone. How to mourn your mother. To begin, expand your definition of mourn. A funeral is never a prerequisite, nor is a death. Stretch your mind to the task of probing Mother's Day cards. Where is the mother who bakes whole wheat bread but seduces the man she knows you crush on? Where is the mother who presses naked ass cheeks against the picture window, mooning your first ever boyfriend the first time he visits? Where is the mother who delights goading her too-goody, two-shoes daughter but coos about her grace, her intellect? Where is the mother who sings, hooray, hooray, the 1st of May, outdoor fucking starts today, re-rack each card? When, after a savage 35-year marriage, she finally leaves your dad, detonating his psychosis landmines, his artful arrangement of family photographs, matchbox, red jerry can in the backyard fire pit, his royal unhinged nakedness slapping car bumpers along Highway 33, shouting he is God, and you phone her from 4500 kilometers away to plead she gets someone, a paramedic, the police, Purolator, anyone, to check on him, but instead she says, he's no longer my problem. Pay attention to the clench in your stomach, threatening to loosen your bowels, the rubber band pressure at your temples, the way your vision blurs. Get comfortable with it. Next, ignore the dog turds littering her front hall. She lives with her new partner after all, a man who encouraged the turquoise tattoo of a harp seal occupying the wrinkly real estate between her left breast and her pants belt. He worked retail in the past but retired to professionally burn through your mother's limited savings. Wonder the magic of her new relationship. How it rabbits a stranger from the hat of your mother. Notice when she breaks pattern, misses phoning you the 1st of May to sing hooray, hooray. Concentrate when a policeman calls one snowy afternoon to explain your mum was picked up, coatless, shoeless, completely lost mere meters beyond her own driveway. He suggests waitlisting her for long-term care, then pauses before explaining how shocked his colleagues were at the state of her home, stuffed with hoarded clothing, porcelain teacups, costume jewelry, piles of dog shit, the stench of cat piss, a partner sporting a turquoise thong. Yes, you admit, she's lived that way for years. Admire the resignation in your voice. But is she safe? Puzzle whether he is asking about your mum or you. Try not to cry. In that long moment, waiting for the ink of your signature to dry beneath power of attorney, on a form officially committing your mother to a dementia ward, this place where all the perimeter doors automatically lock and all the interior doors automatically don't. Question the accuracy of the verb commit in this context. Is it an antithesis? Negotiate, level of intervention, options. Paltry checkboxes on papery forms. No resuscitation, checkmark. Consider drawing a happy face in the box instead. Can a happy face be a wish? When you locate your drifting mother in a communal toilet wearing only her shirt, the clothes of her bottom half soaked and crumpled in the corner, she will cry, embarrassed, but without the words to express this. Hug her close, let her tears mix with your own on your pressed together cheeks. But suppress your wail when she sobs, I just want to be a person with pants. In dementia land, feverish conversations lack chronology. Storied people of mums past cross decades, the long dead fraternize with the yet unborn. In dementia land, meals are bibbed. She will stretch her lips wide to show half-chewed food and guffaw. Recognize her there. In dementia land, staff rotate holiday decorations. Photos of patients on Santa's knee, Valentine hearts, shamrocks, Easter bunnies. After countless conversations and countless half-chewed meals and the decorations of bobble-headed portraits pasted atop Halloween witches and goblins, you explain, words catching and choking your throat, you finally left your marriage. Feel her stiff uncertainty awkwardly patting your back. Hear yourself calling for your mother, clinging to her neck, a sobbing wreck. Lay your head on her shoulder. Turn your gaze to the wall. Meet your mother's face there, her bobblehead glued to the body of a ghostbuster. Finally, pass the drooling, barely breathing wheelchaired bodies lining the hallways as if it's nothing horrific. Find your mother wrapped in a red bathrobe layered over 4 or 5 shirts and so many gaudy necklaces. Feel grateful she dressed herself today. She remembers the punchline, even laughs, when you sing, hooray, hooray, though doesn't remember your name or know you're her daughter. She believes you're a graying volunteer, But listen, when she tells you how beautiful you are, how much she loves you, peel her a fresh clementine. She will think it's the most magical thing. Dear viewers, that was our channel's discussion on the topic. The empath is about to enter the biggest comeback of their life, Jung insight. If you found this video helpful or meaningful, please consider subscribing to support the channel. If you'd like me to create more content about emotions, relationships, or other psychological topics, feel free to leave a comment and let me know. I'll do my best to help you understand why you're feeling the way you do and what's really happening beneath the surface. For now, it's time to say goodbye. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video. Thank you.